Well, hello, and welcome to the MilVet Podcast. Your podcast hosts are Brendan Aronson, Tim Shaw, and Bo Higgins. We are military veterans, entrepreneurs, and investors. But most importantly, we strive to empower military service members, veterans, and their families. We believe that all veterans deserve a career that fires them up, a career in which you can learn, you can earn, and you can build a world-class network. On this podcast, we interview civilian and military veteran leaders who are incredible founders, writers, thinkers, and investors. My primary goal is to inspire you to achieve great things. Let's dive into today's episode. Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of the MilVet Podcast. I am your host, Bo Higgins, and I have the pleasure and privilege today to be joined by a longtime friend and actually fraternity brother, Stockton Croft, and we will get to Stockton in a minute. For those that may not be familiar with the MilVet provides an executive platform for veterans that are interested in getting into private equity, venture capital, founder, startup space. That's something that you're interested in. Please, I encourage you to check out our website, www.themilvet.org. You can sign up to check out our podcast. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can see events that we have in the future. You can meet some of the guys on the team in person, and you can always check all the open roles that we have available today. So check that out, and we'd love to have you be part of the MilVet team. But today we are here with my good friend Stockton Croft. And Stockton, welcome to the show, man. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Bill. Looking forward to it.
Well, hey, as we kind of kick this thing off, I'd love you to kind of start off with just tell the audience what you're doing now.
Sure. So, again, my name's Stockton Croft. I live in Atlanta, and I'm one of the founding partners of Eagle Merchant Partners. So we're a private equity firm based in Atlanta, and our focus is on lower middle market companies. So that's 2 to 10 million EBITDA, where they're founder owners based in the Southeast, in really two core segments. One is franchise and consumer services, which is what I do. So we've been a very large franchisee at Planet Fitness at one point. We've owned a couple different restaurant franchisors and franchisees, those types of investments. And then my partner, Bill, focuses on commercial and industrial services. And the commonality between the two of those is we're trying to find a business in Charleston, South Carolina, for instance, where it's a waste recycling business that we can then grow from South Carolina to the 5 other southern states and then sell that to another private equity firm. And so we've had great fortune of working with a lot of different founder owners, and that's really what I focus on is buying those types of companies and institutionalizing them, and then growing them through acquisitions and organic growth and selling them to the next buyer.
That's great, and pretty cool stuff you're doing out there for sure, and something I know that is near and dear to the hearts of a lot of the veterans that are listening to the show. And while you're not a veteran, you do have a lot of veteran connections, and I think it's important for the audience to hear the history of why you're Eagle Merchant Partners for one thing, and maybe a little bit about the history of veterans in your family too.
Yeah, let me start with the history of the veterans, then I'll talk about the connection that Eagle has. So, long history of veterans in our family. So my grandfather, Edward Stockton Croft Jr., grew up in Aiken, South Carolina, went to the Citadel, and then he was out working when in 42 he had to rejoin the Army. And so he spent from 1942 to 1945 in the Pacific Campaign, primarily in Papua New Guinea, where he was forward artillery. And so he did that. He actually didn't even meet my aunt until she was 3 years old. They had her right when he left in 42. And then his brother Croswell was Naval Academy, class of 41, was on the USS California when it was sunk, and he's written an incredible story about getting off the ship. He swam to safety. He was able to take off his life jacket and save a couple of people on the way in. He was an incredible veteran. And then my father, he went to Washington and Lee University on an ROTC scholarship, and then he joined the Army and went to Vietnam, as did his younger brother Laurie, who was 3 years younger, who also went to Vietnam. For both of them, 2 to 3 years. So lots of military history in the family. I did, when I was in college in New Beau, I did, get a wild hair and call Naval OCS to talk to them about joining. And then they asked enough questions. And by the end of the conversation, I realized I did not have it in me to kind of go do it, to go try it. So Bo obviously went to go do that. I was, I didn't have it in me, but with Eagle, so the name Eagle Merchant Partners, where that came from is we were starting to think, we got formed in 2013. We'd actually come out of a merchant bank based in Bahrain. So we'd worked for this big global organization. We spun out to form Eagle. And again, our focus was on the Southeast. And as we thought about it, and with kind of military history, a couple of us in our families, we thought about different aspects of the Southeast related to the military. And one of the things we, all watched Band of Brothers. And if you know, the Band of Brothers was the 101st Airborne, and they trained in Toccoa, Georgia, up in Northeast Georgia, which was near a lake that we used to go to early on. And so the name Eagle Merchant Partners actually was from the Screaming Eagles, which is the nickname, for the 101st Airborne. So again, a nod to the military, super excited. We have hired a lot of military guys across our portfolio companies, and can talk more about that and why we like that profile, and we think that's a really good fit for what we're trying to do as we try to institutionalize these companies.
It's great to hear how the military influenced you as a kid from just the family side of it, and having the stories, I'm sure, that your grandfather told and your father told, and the influence they have. It's something that's always out there, certainly. But I will back it up to college, because we were there together, and you say that, I did it, you did, man. Look, if you knew me in college, there's no way there was any thought that I would be in the Marine Corps. So you could have done it. Trust me, I know you well enough that if you wanted to do it,
I
you
will,
could have
I
done
will agree with your personal assessment. That was for the 20 years of your formative years coming out. But obviously, we admire you a lot for doing that, and love watching from afar.
No, I appreciate that for sure. Let's talk a little bit about what you kind of our time at UVA. I mean, we only overlapped there for a year, and I had the pleasure to be your big brother in fraternity, which was great. But talk about a little bit of your journey through college, and I know you had some kind of pivotal moments in there that kind of shaped your experience during college. It may be a little different than others.
Yeah, so when I got to UVA, I was super motivated. I think I'm probably one of the few people who literally every single semester after your first semester, my grades got worse all the way till I graduated. So had a 3.95 my freshman year, 3.95 my freshman year. Came into my sophomore year, and the grades started to become more of a problem that first semester, my sophomore year, and I just felt burnt out. And ultimately, I remember going to my parents and saying, I've got enough credits from high school and AP credits that I want to take some time off. And my plan is I'm going to live in the fraternity house, but I'm going to go be a bartender in Georgetown. And they said, look, that is not a plan. That's not a good idea. And they were right to say that. And they mentioned a really good family friend named Charles Schaffer, who's 2 years older than me, that had gone to Princeton and really had gotten off the rails in different ways, and had just gone to a Knowles program. So Knowles is National Outdoor Leadership School, really good program where it's pack in, pack out. There's no toilet paper. I always tell people that so they can really understand what you're doing. He had done his in Kenya, and so I studied it, and ultimately I did what was called the semester in the Rockies. So I flew to Lander, Wyoming. So I spent basically January in the fraternity house, which again was probably my least productive month, maybe of my life, I would say. Then flew to, and in fact, Bill, I remember you don't remember this, but I remember trying to get in shape for it, and I remember you and I taking a couple of runs with Bill Knight and some other things. So you at least were helpful to me as I started to go out to this thing. But I got out there, as my dad describes, the picture of me, because I got a picture when I went out there, and then after when I grew a beard. But he was like, you just look like a total cherry. Like I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And so Knowles, again, was a full semester. It's called Semester in the Rockies. So you started off in the Absaroka mountain range in Wyoming, and it was 10 below the entire time. I mean, it was freezing, and there was no toilet paper. And you were basically on cross-country skis and hiking, and you had to pack everything in and pack everything out. People always ask, what'd you do for toilet paper? I said, think snowball, but you have to shape it to work. And so, that was a piece of it. And then every other day you would ski or hike to a new location, and you would dig what would be called either a Quincy, which is almost like an underground igloo, or you build an igloo, or you would be under a tarp with snow on top of it. So it was to me, that was a really big formative decision. I did that. That was 3 weeks. And the next 4 weeks was Canyonland camping down in the Roberts Ruiz Canyon. And the point is, did a whole semester of that, and ultimately that just got my head straight. I realized all the advantages I had, and I came back kind of refreshed, and got through the rest of UVA, and really kind of set myself on to what I wanted to do, which was not be. I felt coming into that, this kind of coming out of private school at UVA, very privileged life to that point, and I wanted to really, it got my mind reset, and I wanted to go for some things, and wanted to try to, take this one precious life and do something extraordinary with it.
It's one of those things where I think everyone that goes to the Marine Corps talks about those crucible moments, right? Where you prove yourself and you become part of a team, and the camaraderie from that, the just going through, whether it's boot camp, whether it's officer candidate school for us, those are the moments that you remember. They're hard, right? But that's what makes you a Marine. And it sounds like that experience for you was something that you needed in your life at that time to kind of figure your own stuff out in a lot of ways, right? I mean, to get that mental, spiritual, physical, all in alignment, because it can get out of whack. We all probably are out a little bit out of whack when we're in college, but to figure that out, I think is truly important for the journey moving forward. And what would you say? Like, I mean, obviously there's a physical change, but more than that, what would you say that you got from that program that set you up for success, maybe moving forward?
Yeah, to me it was just this concept that, like, if I could get through that, I mean, literally 3 weeks in 10 below the entire time, that as long as you're going to, work your ass off and keep trying, you can't fail. So if you don't give up, you can't fail. And it was just that mindset that I don't know that I had that in me until that trip, but that was, that really set me up with, I want to go for things. I want to do something different. I'm willing to take risks, and I'm willing to back myself on those risks because I've been able to, get through something that was incredibly challenging.
No, I love that. I mean, if you don't give up, you can't fail. And I talk on this show a lot, about veterans and what makes veterans different and why people should hire them. And that concept of grit comes out a lot, right? I mean, if you've been through these crucible experiences, you've been punched in the face, right? You've had to put your head down and just grind through stuff, and you do it successfully. If you're going to be successful in the military or successful in a lot of different things, that you have to have that quality. And I like to think that's something that sets apart veterans from many of their peers out there that may not have had those experiences. It might right from college into grad school and onto a civilian job without having those types of experiences. Having that experience to just have to grind through something that's really, really hard, where it'd be very easy to quit and say, I'm good. I'm going back home to mom's couch. Enough of this. I think that's something that is very relatable and something that is, sets veterans apart from maybe their peers, like I said before, on their journey to wherever they want to get in life later on. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, and I'd add to that as we think about veterans for positions, that we're looking for. One is just the ability to deal with adversity because, I mean, all business is tough, and in particular what we're doing, where we're buying companies and trying to grow them and put people into them and put them in the crucible, as you said, that's not one. But two, it's really that military veterans understand structure and understand process and understand how to put things in an order that they can go achieve versus some people just are constantly putting out fires. And I would say that's the other piece that we really like is just the understanding and the embracing of structure and institutionalizing things. That to me is what we really like about the veterans that have worked with us in the past.
No, I love that. I mean, look, as a Marine, the planning process for us is everything, right? We spend a lot of time obsessing on planning because if you plan well, the execution becomes easy. If you
Yeah.
do the work ahead of time, the actual missions themselves can be super easy, but you have to put all the work in up front, do the analysis, do the rehearsals, dig deep into it. I think that's a great point and something that I think is inherent in veterans and which makes them, again, hopefully great hires as well. Well, let's talk. Let's go back to your journey, though. So, obviously, you had that experience. You went back to UVA, kind of with a different maybe mindset on life and yourself, and a believing in yourself. Talk about your journey from there, and kind of maybe your transition. I mean, did you always know you wanted to get into the private equity space, or kind of what was your journey immediately from school, and kind of we'll go from there.
Yeah, so my journey, started on a really straight path that was very defined. So my father had been an investment banker in Atlanta. He had ultimately, started his own kind of small boutique investment bank, and that was kind of all I knew. So when I got back to UVA, I was highly focused on going to New York, working on Wall Street, getting into an investment banking program, and ultimately I did. I went to a firm called Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette. That was a great experience. I was an investment banking analyst working on a lot of deals. That firm ultimately got bought by Credit Suisse, but a lot of that team ultimately went on to Blackstone. So the guy that ran Blackstone for a long time, Tony James, he was the head of the group that I worked in at DLJ. And so I had really good experience working for kind of outstanding people. And half of what I did was work with what was called their merchant bank, which was their private equity group. And that was actually a team within them that was pure private equity. I knew, real I'd read Barbarians at the Gates, so I knew a little bit about private equity, but I didn't know a ton about it. And when I got there, the first deal I worked on was they were taking public one of their companies. It was called G-Tech Corporation, and it was a lottery systems provider. They bought it a year before for, I want to say, 160 million. We were about to take it public for 1.6 billion, so it's just a huge home run. And I remember distinctly through that, I thought, hey, my dad's been grinding as this investment banker his whole career. These guys in the private equity team are about to make just a ton of money. That seems more interesting. But really, the most interesting part to me was the founder owner, a guy named Guy Snowden. And so Guy Snowden had founded G-Tech, and I remember seeing him even on the day we took it public on the New York Stock Exchange. I just remember always being attracted to what his journey had been. He had basically borrowed all the money to start this company. He had done incredibly well with it. That was what it was. It was that it was the take the full risk, have it all on your shoulders. And, that was what was attractive to me. And that's kind of when I started to think, look, that's what I want to go do. I want to go do that. And but you and I have talked about this later in my career. Someone gave me this analogy, which I think is a really good analogy, is think of your career as a horse race, and there's no wrong way to play it. You just have to figure out where you should be. And so, the first level of the horse race is the groom. And so a groom is going to work with, 20 different horses, get them ready for the race, get them prepared. I think of that being maybe a consultant or, a mid-level manager at a firm, or even an investment bank would be more of a groom. And then the next level is the jockey. And so a jockey is going to be, you have to pick, only 4 to 5 horses to ride, and you got to pick the right horse, and you got to ride them better than anybody else could have. So, that's a higher level of risk. It's also a higher level of reward. And then the last piece of the horse race is being the horse, and that is risk is 100% on your shoulders. You're going to succeed or fail based on how you do, and the choices you make. And at that point, I was 24 and I wanted to be the horse. And so my goal coming out of that, then out of investment banking, was I want to go broaden my skill set, do some other things, but I want to get operating experience, because I did not think you could ultimately be the horse without getting some operating experience. And so that's kind of how I came out of investment banking, wanting to go in and be the horse and get some operating experience.
I truly love that analogy, and the idea of whether you're the groom, the jockey, or the horse. I think will resonate with a lot of folks in our audience, because again, I think a lot of the folks want to be the horse, but it is risky to be the horse, right? I mean, it is the most reward, but it's the highest risk. So there's always a trade-off somewhere, or a continuum there of what's right for you. I mean, it's not right for everybody, obviously. It obviously ended up proving, to be right for you, which is great. But I think it's also interesting because a lot of folks, it's probably easier and safer and more of a normal path to start off in the investment banking world, in the finance world. It's just more of a natural, easy path out of college into those roles, right? It's a more defined way to go be a groom, so to speak. How do you, or what would you recommend for folks that want to go from being the groom to the horse. And maybe you can talk about your experiences of how you did that, what you learned, what you wish you would have known beforehand, some of those experiences to get from one side of the equation to the other.
Yeah, and I really went from one side. I went from the groom to the horse, back to a jockey, and so my journey then after kind of I worked in New York, was ultimately went back to business school to broaden my skill set. Got a job at Bain Consulting, and I took that because I wanted to again get broader than just finance, knowing that I could get into an operating role. From there, I got recruited to be director of M&A for a Fortune 500 company here in Atlanta, where it had operating businesses, and their pitch to me was, come in, run M&A for us. You've done both consulting and investment banking. You want operating experience, we'll put you into an operating role. And so I did that for a number of years. It was a great experience. They had one smaller division that was an envelope division where I spent most of my time, and really worked shoulder to shoulder with a guy named Brian Sass, that was VP of operations. And we bought a couple of different envelope companies to consolidate there, and we actually went and turned them around. One was out on the West Coast, and that experience, even though he was more the pure operating guy, I was the financial operating guy. It was a true partnership. And then ultimately, what happened there in 1999, they decided to put up for sale a small business that was called Technoaid, and they made X-ray markers. So if you've ever had an X-ray, most military guys have probably had X-rays. The little L and R that would mark your arm for left or right, they made those, and it was a really neat niche business, highly profitable. And Brian and I looked at ourselves in '99 when everybody's going to .coms and said, this we're never going to get a better opportunity to go buy something and be the horse than right now. And so he and I put together the deal. We bought it for $4 million. We personally guaranteed, the $3 million loan. As I like to say, all my only assets at that point were a leased Volvo and, a house with about 60 grand of equity. So sure, I'll personally guarantee $3 million. I mean, there was nothing else there. And so we did that, and we ultimately built that company up over the next few years. We took it from, call it, 4 million sales and about $1 million EBITDA. We made a big acquisition of an envelope business that competed with our prior employer up in Roanoke, Virginia, and we got it up to 7 million EBITDA, about 60 million in sales. We brought in a private equity firm to back us. Brian was the CEO, and then I was president, CFO, but we were 50-50. And so we owned this business, and I was the horse. And it was, it went really well, and then it went really poorly. And, we got hit in the face a number of times. I mean, really the biggest one was when we bought that envelope business, the prior management team was competing with us for it. We told them, some of them would have jobs, not all of them. And then ultimately bought it in a bankruptcy auction. And, day one of our ownership, they all quit. Every single one of them quit. So and they took a key contract from us that was about $1 million of EBITDA for file folders going into big box retailers. So, I'd spent all this time building my skill set, getting ready to be the horse. I was the horse. I was 30 years old at this point, 2 young kids, and day one, everybody quits and takes $1 million of our EBITDA. And to me, I'm just spending more time on this because as I think of my career, and I can go through all the other pieces, to me, this was, not only the most formative, but it was that pivot point in my career because it wasn't going well, but we were set up and we ultimately grinded through it. And I did, from a financial standpoint, probably my best work of my career, where we sold off that original Technoaid business. We sold our real estate in the sale leaseback. We sold off our file folder business, and we took our debt from about 25 million down to 10, and the company could survive. And so that was kind of this big piece of my career that's called BSC, which is Brian Sass and Stockton Croft. It's kind of a trite name. The postscript on that company is, in 2003, when we sold everything, took the debt down, it did make sense for me as CFO to be there full time. Brian agreed to move up to Roanoke and run it. That company, we're still, I'm still on the board of directors of that company today. It's 15 million EBITDA. It's owned 100% by the employees and an ESOP, and it's been, just a hell of a journey over 27 years. But again, and at that point, Bo, I'd been the horse, and I realized, hey, I don't know that my skill set is necessarily set to be the horse. It was a lot of risk. I didn't have, the kind of general management, operating experience. I had some operating experience. I had good operating experience, but to me at that point, I was like, hey, I should go be a jockey where I can work with 4 to 5 different things at once. If I can pick good people to go run those and work with them and help them out, I'll be much better set. And so that's when I started in 2003 on my career in private equity. That's really will be kind of my career, and that's that's where I will finish up. So again, I started as a groom. I became the horse. I wasn't a great horse, and then became a jockey. And and you're always you talk about the horse and the jockey, but you're really different. You're kind of will be two at once. And so in some ways, I'm still the horse, and that I'm one of the two founders here, and we've raised the bulk of the capital, and a lot of the risk is on us for kind of how the firm does. But in terms of what I do day to day, I'm way more of a jockey working with great founder owners on trying to grow their businesses.
Yeah, I would have to think that in my head, I think about the horse, and it's again you're the guy that's the horse. You're getting the calls at midnight when the factory ain't producing, and you're getting the call that the shipment's delayed. That's a different. You're a little more detached, I would think. I mean, I get it. You have the jockey has to know the horse really really well, but you're not
Yeah,
the one necessarily getting the midnight call, or maybe you're the second person getting the call. You're not the first person getting the call.
yeah. Probably like the third or fourth, but
Yeah,
yes, that's right.
Roger that. Roger that. Well, I mean, and then I think that analogy is such a great one of your journey of, again, being and having to be able to see it from all sides too, which I think is important. Because that does seem like it would potentially be the natural flow, right? You're kind of in the early learning phase and you're figuring out. I mean, some people may say, "I just want to be the groom, and this is good for me, and I don't want to do it at all." And then, as a young guy, I think all of us, and you bet on yourself, which is that's what that's what if you're a founder, that's why we talk to a lot of founders on these shows, on this podcast, and they all talk about the minimum. Like, look, I believed in me and my abilities, and I put all my chips in, right? I mean, and you have to be willing to do that, and to be the man and take all the risk. That's a hard thing to do for a lot of people. But if you can do that and successfully navigate it, which you did, and then you can and then have the ability to say, okay, I know what that's like. That's pretty good, but my skill set is one where I can manage 5 horses out there. I think that's just self awareness too, and is how your style and your leadership and your and just your focus on what you're good at, right? I mean, I think we none of us know what we're good at sometimes till we try it, and you figure that part out, and you set yourself up, long term for success, where you're going to be the most happy and the most impactful. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other dynamic then is what's your risk tolerance?
Yes.
And that's the other piece. So it's your skills, it's your risk tolerance, and all that, and you kind of don't know till you get into it, and you kind of got to take those risks and you realize, hey, I'm willing to take these risks, and I meet plenty of people that want to go do something entrepreneurial, but yet they won't leave their job to do it, and I just know that that's not a great recipe for success. I mean, you got to kind of go put yourself out there and bet on yourself, and then you see how it goes.
Yeah, I say all the time, the entrepreneurship is not a toe in the water; it's a cannonball, right? You got
Right.
to just jump in and go for it, because you can't just it's not an ease into it kind of a deal. So,
Yeah.
no doubt about that. Now, I would through the course of your journey. I mean, if I always like to ask the question of if you had to do it again, what are things you wish you would have known beforehand, maybe that you did? I mean, your path was somewhat traditional in that you went from college to to Wall Street, went back and got your MBA, went back into the kind of the Bain, and then moved down the line. Are there things though at some point was there something like, man, that's something that I wish I would have learned that, studied that. I wish I would have thought about that beforehand. For folks out there, especially that want to get into private equity slash venture capital, that like, hey, this is something I didn't think of that would be important, but man, I wish I would have spent maybe a little more time on this.
Yeah, and I would say, look, that's always an evolving type, question and thought. I mean, the main thing that I guess I've come to understand about private equity and kind of where we fit into it is that, 80% of your success is ultimately on the people decisions you're making, and it's on the CEO and then the CEO's direct reports, and it's how you think about that and things that you learn over time about who's going to be successful and who's not, and it's really hard. I mean, it's very difficult, and I think it's a great quote that basically wisdom comes from making a lot of really bad decisions. It's a lifetime of bad decisions that you learn from, you go to. And so I think, if I had understood early on how important the people piece of it was versus the numbers piece, because I really came into things more from an analytic numbers piece of it, I think that would have, helped me out. And if I'd been more kind of attuned to that as I went through my career and thought about people. And so ultimately, if I could go back and change it, it would be that. Just be more aware of the people you're working with and the people that are working in these companies and what they're good at and think about that. And I think we've gotten way better. One of the things we do now with every company we buy is we do serious kind of org assessments with outside consultants to come in and think through how the team's going to fit together and their strengths, weaknesses. And again, I think I've learned a lot from those processes.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's leadership, right? Leadership is leading people and understanding people and having the right. I always talk about, your the tools in your toolbox are always evolving, right? When you start off as a leader, your leadership toolbox, maybe as a lieutenant in the Marine Corps, you have a hammer, you can yell at guys, right? Or you can nudge them. But over time, you learn that you add a screwdriver and you add a drill and you add a chisel and you add this, because different people, different situations, and the more you can see and are exposed to, you learn and add those leadership tools to the toolbox. If you're a good leader, that is. Some of them only use that one tool forever, and at some point, that you're not going to get very far. That's the way you lead. But I love that, just from what we do at the Millvet. Obviously, our focus is on just that, right? The people piece of it. Helping companies to make the right decisions, to find the right people, and hopefully we're vetting them for you and bringing you people that are going to be leaders that you can count on to trust and be part of your team and help you take it to the next level. Because again, I think you're right. People think a lot of times the financial piece is important. Don't get me wrong. Your personal piece of it is important, but if you're going to grow the team, you have to invest in your people if it's going to be a long-term thing. That is just, that is a theme that has resonated over and over from folks I've talked to on the show. The needed investment in your people to be successful long-term, for sure.
Yeah, but one thing I was just going to add, and for your guys to be thinking about, is, to me, the number one success criteria out of the CEOs that we've worked with and managed teams is, will people from prior jobs come follow them to the next job? And that, to me, that's something we always look at. We like to understand, will people follow you? And if you're a good leader, then people should want to follow you to the next spot. And that's I would think for the audience here, be thinking about that. Do people want to follow you and go to the next spot when you take the next kind of step up in your career?
I think that'll resonate a lot with our veteran audience, because again, we've all worked for leaders and seen folks that are friends of ours that became generals. They always bring their operations officer from their unit before, right? They're by the time you get to be a senior leader in the military, you do have the ability to hand pick your chief of staff, right? And your ops, those two particularly, your chief of staff and your operations officer. And that's the same kind of analogy of, right, when if they can bring those people with them and people want to go work with them, that is a great sign. Guys, that and the word also gets out when guys don't want to go follow those guys, like, ooh, you don't want to work for him. You know what I mean? So I think the reverse of that is always also true, for sure. Well, we're getting kind of close to the end of the podcast here. As we kind of wrap things up, I'm going to ask you two things. One is any words of wisdom, books, podcasts, things that folks that want to get in this space that you would recommend to our audience as far as resources. And the other question I always ask my guest is, like, if we come back and interview you 3 years from now, where do you want to be professional? What's the next step beyond the jockey, maybe, or is it more horses that you're in charge of? I don't know, but I'm curious.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of podcasts, there are some great private equity podcasts. So if your guys are interested in lower middle market private equity, which again, lower middle market would be defined as, not tiny venture type stuff, but that next level where there's small companies, you're trying to grow them and sell them to other private equity guys. the one podcast I listen to that I think is really good. It's called North Star with a guy named Jeff Henningsen out of Texas, and basically that's all he does is he interviews lower middle market kind of PE founders, and I think there's 40 to 50 of them, and it's always about their journey, and he at the end always asks, give me one quote that you and it, to me, out of all the different podcasts, I listen to a lot of podcasts. To me, that's kind of the best one for at least our type of business and learning about it, learning how founders got started. So again, North Star with Jeff Henningsen, I think is a really good one. And then I don't know about 3 years from now, but basically, so I'm 57, 57 and a half. My goal is to grind, as hard as I'm grinding now until I'm 65. So that's 7.5 years. And for us over the next couple of years, successes, we've already raised Fund 1, we raised 21 to 23, and that was 265 million. Fund 2 was 415 million. We raised that last year. I'd like to get us Fund 3, and then, it'll be a transition out of that. And I don't know what retirement looks like. I'm not sure I'm going to be great at retirement. I just came back from a 2-week vacation, which was, I believe, my only 2-week vacation I've ever taken. And, I was going crazy by the end of it. But, my goal would be kind of get Eagle into a spot where, it can kind of go on, without Bill, my partner, and I. And we've actually brought in an executive coach to help us with that and think through that. And so I think we're all pretty attuned to, that's the goal is get this as an organization to continue to operate. And my goal is to kind of get there and kind of help coach up that group of guys that are and gals that are mid-30s to early 40s to kind of be ready to take this over when I'm, pretty slowed down in, 6-7 years from now.
I love it, man. That's some great advice as far as the podcast, and I love the idea of where you're heading, and that you're helping to mentor and send the elevator back down for the next folks behind you. That's a big part of being a leader, is making the time, because someone helped you get to where you are, and I think that's what hopefully these shows are helping people too. But taking the time to help and mentor those folks that are coming behind you and build that next generation that has to come up and take it over. It's great stuff. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Stockton. Hey, man, it has been truly a pleasure to have you on the show today. Look forward to hopefully seeing you in Atlanta or somewhere, maybe UVA soon, who knows. And again, thanks again for the time.
Thanks, Bo. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. For more content, follow us on Instagram @TheMilitaryVet or on LinkedIn. Join us at an upcoming event or learn more on our website, themilvet.org. Feel free to email us directly at leadership@themilvet.org. Thank you so much and take care.